Long before European ships anchored on North American coasts, the continent's indigenous peoples had forged complex societies guided by spiritual cosmologies and long-standing traditions. Among these peoples were the Sioux, known collectively as the Oseti Zakhawan, or the Seven Council Fires, by approximately 1300 AD. What began as a collection of closely related groups migrating from the Mississippi River region had coalesced into a structured alliance. Over centuries, these communities established themselves in an area spanning from the forests of north-central Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin westward onto the vast Great Plains. Within the Oseti Zakhawan, three main linguistic and cultural divisions emerged: the Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota. The Dakota consisted of bands such as the Mdewakanton, Wapatawan, Wapakute, and Sistewan. The Nakota embraced the Yankton and Yanktonai. The Lakota, also referred to as Teton, encompassed 7 bands, including the Oglala, Sikangu Brule, Hunk Papa, Minikanju, Itazipko, Sihasapa, Blackfoot Sioux, and Uhinumpa. Each division maintained its own dialect and regional homeland while sharing interlocking religious beliefs, cultural values, and political relationships. In pre-colonial times, Sioux life centered on kinship networks and subsistence strategies intimately tied to the environment. Extended family units, or Taiospe, formed the building blocks of social organization. Leadership tended to be consensus-based, with respected elders, war leaders, and spiritual figures guiding communal decisions. Warfare, when it occurred, was often about territorial integrity, protecting hunting grounds, or maintaining honor. Men served as hunters and protectors, while women's roles encompassed domestic life, food preparation, hide tanning, and the artistry of quill work and beadwork, expressions of cultural identity passed down through generations. Children were called Wakanshan, sacred beings, reinforcing the belief that each new generation carried spiritual significance. This reverence for youth and family linked the Sioux firmly to their ancestors and descendants. Spirituality permeated every facet of Sioux existence. Wakantanka, often translated as the Great Mystery or Great Spirit, represented the creative force behind all life. The Sioux perceived the universe as interconnected and alive with spiritual energy. Ceremonies such as the Sun Dance reinforced community bonds and personal sacrifice, reaffirming moral values and social cohesion. The Sacred Pipe ceremony invoked the presence of the spiritual world, forging peace and understanding. Places like the Black Hills Paha Sepa were revered as a sacred center of the world, a place where spiritual power radiated into human affairs. The moral guidance gleaned from dreams, visions, and prayers influenced decisions on warfare, governance, and social responsibilities. Mourning rituals, which lasted for days, supported the belief that the deceased's spirit journeyed toward an afterlife, accompanied symbolically by the prayers and songs of their community. Contact with Europeans, beginning with the French in the 17th century, introduced new dynamics. The Sioux engaged in the fur trade, acquiring firearms, metal tools, and cloth, and forging alliances or rivalries with tribes like the Ojibwe, Cree, and Assiniboine. The competition for trade goods and territorial control shifted traditional power balances. By the 18th century, tensions over hunting grounds and trade routes sometimes flared into armed conflict. Although Europeans changed indigenous economies, Sioux autonomy remained strong until the mid-19th century, when the United States' westward expansion accelerated. Treaties like the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty sought to delineate Sioux territory, establishing what came to be known as the Great Sioux Reservation, covering much of present-day South Dakota west of the Missouri River. Yet the U.S. rarely honored these treaties for long. The early to mid-19th century proved tumultuous. In Minnesota, the Dakota Sioux faced increasing pressures as settlers demanded land. By 1858, their territory was reduced severely. The federal government's delayed and often insufficient payments sparked hunger and despair, culminating in the Dakota War of 1862. After the conflict, 38 Dakota men were hanged at Mankato in the largest mass execution in U.S. history, a trauma that reverberates in Sioux communities to this day. Farther west, Red Cloud's War 1866 to 1868 ended with the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie, supposedly guaranteeing Sioux rights to the Black Hills in perpetuity. Yet, gold discoveries in the early 1870s triggered a massive incursion of miners and settlers, again undermining treaty obligations. The famous Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876 demonstrated continued Sioux resistance. Led by figures like Sitting Bull Hunk Papa Lakota and Crazy Horse Oglala Lakota, along with Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho allies, the Sioux achieved a decisive victory over Lieutenant Colonel George A. Custer's 7th Cavalry. While this victory resounded across the continent and remains legendary, U.S. military retaliation was swift and relentless. Within a few years, the buffalo herds upon which Sioux life depended were nearly exterminated. Starvation and enforced dependency on government rations became commonplace on reservations. In 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek on Pine Ridge Reservation, U.S. troops massacred approximately 150 to 370 Lakota men, women, and children, an atrocity marking the end of major armed indigenous resistance on the plains and the suppression of the Ghost Dance, a pan-Indian spiritual movement inspired in part by Paiute prophet Vovoka's visions. The 20th century introduced new challenges under U.S. federal policies aimed at assimilation. The Dawes Act of 1887 and subsequent land allotments broke up communal holdings, undermining traditional kinship economics. Boarding schools separated children from their families and languages, causing cultural trauma that endures, yet the Sioux survived. The Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 allowed tribes to create constitutions and regain some self-governance. Sioux tribal governments, such as the Oglala Sioux Tribe at Pine Ridge or the Sikangmu Rosebud Sioux Tribe, used these structures to assert limited sovereignty. During both World Wars, Sioux individuals enlisted in the U.S. Armed Forces at high rates, some serving as code talkers using Dakota and Lakota languages to securely transmit messages. By the mid-20th century, a pan-Indian movement emerged to address systemic injustices. The American Indian Movement AIM, founded in 1968, included many Sioux activists. In 1973, an AIM-led occupation of Wounded Knee drew international attention to treaty violations, corruption in tribal governments under the influence of U.S. authorities, and the poverty that gripped reservations. Although the occupation ended violently, it marked a turning point, inspiring a new generation of indigenous activism, legal challenges, and cultural revivals. Legal struggles over the Black Hills epitomized the ongoing quest for justice. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Black Hills were taken illegally, awarding significant monetary compensation. By 2018, this had accrued to over $1 billion US. The Sioux, however, consistently refused the funds, demanding the return of their sacred lands rather than a financial payoff. This refusal underlines the non-negotiable spiritual and cultural significance of place within Sioux cosmology. Today, Sioux communities remain dispersed across several reservations: Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, Lower Brule, Crow Creek, Sisseton-Waupun, Yankton, and Flinders Santee throughout the Dakotas, Nebraska, Minnesota, and Montana. Pine Ridge, for example, home to the Oglala Lakota, has frequently recorded some of the lowest per capita incomes in the United States. Health disparities, limited job opportunities, and inadequate housing are persistent challenges. Nonetheless, resilience and cultural continuity shine through. Tribal colleges, such as Oglala Lakota College and St. Gleska University, provide higher education integrated with Sioux values and languages. Initiatives like the Lakota Language Consortium, immersion schools, and language camps strive to revive the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota tongues. Younger generations learn traditional dances, songs, and prayers at powwows, maintaining links to their ancestors' ways. Contemporary Sioux activism intersects with global movements for environmental protection and indigenous rights. The 2016 to 2017 protests at Standing Rock against the Dakota Access Pipeline highlighted treaty rights, environmental stewardship, and the importance of safe water. The phrase "Mniwuoni," water is life, resonated worldwide, rallying indigenous nations and allies beyond North America. These demonstrations showcased how deeply Sioux identities remain bound to ancestral lands and natural resources. Even in urban centers like Rapid City, Minneapolis, Denver, or Los Angeles, where many Sioux individuals have migrated for work and education, cultural organizations and community centers foster a sense of belonging and continuity. Cultural renaissance extends to the arts, literature, film, and scholarship. Modern Sioux authors, poets, filmmakers, and artists contribute to an indigenous cultural resurgence, articulating new visions rooted in ancient wisdom. Anthropologists, historians, and indigenous scholars collaborate to restore historical narratives that were distorted or neglected in mainstream accounts. Numerous Sioux people have gained prominence as advocates, educators, and community leaders, bridging traditional knowledge with contemporary political, social, and environmental issues. The Sioux population remains vibrant. According to U.S. Census data from the early 21st century, tens of thousands of individuals identify as Sioux, with a recorded figure from the 2010 census indicating over 170,000 people self-identifying as Sioux alone or in combination. While these numbers reflect complex modern identities, they highlight the enduring legacy of the 7 council fires. The Sioux continue to navigate a future that builds upon their profound spiritual heritage, their tumultuous history of colonization, and their hard-won legal battles for sovereignty and recognition. In essence, the Sioux story spans remarkable chapters, the flowering of pre-colonial societies guided by Wakantanka, the forging of alliances and adaptations in response to European contact, the heartbreak of broken treaties and violent campaigns by the U.S. government, the steadfast refusal to accept monetary compensation for sacred lands, and the ongoing efforts in cultural, linguistic, and spiritual revitalization. In ceremony and protest, classroom and courtroom, powwow arena and digital forum, Sioux nations assert that their history is neither static nor concluded. Their endurance stands as a testament to adaptability, moral courage, and the power of collective memory. The Sioux, among the most renowned indigenous nations of North America, continue to inspire a broader re-examination of justice, environmental responsibility, and respect for cultural diversity. Their resilience, woven through centuries of change and challenge, is both a living legacy and a dynamic force shaping future generations. In this continuation of life, knowledge, and spirit, the Sioux remain committed to preserving the dignity, rights, and sacred relations that have defined them since time immemorial.